So for our first session, we have Nupur Basu, who is going to be telling us about the misconceptions, conspiracies, and the role of the media in terms of the pandemic. Nupur Basu is an award-winning senior journalist and documentary filmmaker from India, and we're very, very lucky to be hearing from her. Over to you, Ms. Nupur Basu.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you, young people. It's always a challenge to speak to. It's easy to speak to adults. It's very, very difficult to speak to children because, you know, as you saw in that last poem that was read out, children can come out with the most surprising, knowledgeable stuff, which we adults, you know, wouldn't even imagine. So, you know, we tend to sort of underestimate you kids, and I will try my best to stay away, steer clear from that, doing that. So what I really want to do is have a little conversation with you about the media and you know, what has been the challenges for the media worldwide, both in India and in other parts. In a sense, we were all united because of this pandemic, and the situation is more or less the same everywhere. And the media everywhere encountered the same kind of challenges as did, media everywhere, you know, where the developing world and the developed world, in a sense, came together in facing this challenge. I'll just try and run you through a couple of the challenges that we had. But at the outset, I just want to say that I know you people have had 2 wonderful days with amazing scientific knowledge and experts. As you know, journalists are not experts. We are, as they say, jack of all trades and master of none. We are like sponges. We take from experts and then we put it out to society. We give the information that we receive from the experts and give it to. So I want to talk about this bridge that we are between policymakers, between experts, and in a situation like a pandemic, what is the role of the media? Where is it supposed to get its information, glean its information, and how is it to then pass it on to to the public in general? And what happened to this bridge? Now, right at the top, I just want to say that this bridge was rather shaky all of last year. I mean, it was swinging from side to side. One didn't know which way the media, the information channels were actually gearing up, and what was the information that was to be put out. So you saw extreme views. And let's just go through a couple of these. So, I mean, the very first thing was when the pandemic was declared by the WHO. There was all this controversy about whether it is a pandemic or not. There were countries in denial, heads of nations, some of the largest, let's name them, the United States, the former president saying, this is not a big thing, all the while, but knowing that it was a big thing. And those came out later. So, you know, there were many countries in denial, there were people in denial. So the very status of the pandemic. So what was the media to do? What was it to convey? Was it a big thing or was it not? How did it do that? History will judge how journalists reported on this, how they separated wheat from chaff, and what did they put out. A year from now, this is a good time to assess how the media actually behaved. And according to me, right at the top, I just want to say, like always, it was good, bad, and ugly. So we'll go through some of those processes and what happened. So once it was established that it is a pandemic and we have to gear up for it, then the next steps, what are we to do? There is no drug, we don't know what, there's no miracle cure. So how are we to protect ourselves? Media has to communicate to the people. And then what's happening on the ground? Already the ICUs are beginning to fill up in certain countries. Cases are beginning to come in large numbers in certain countries, in others not so much. And so then there is again room for complacency there. So how is this messaging being put out? the very first thing was that of the masks. Are we to mask up or not? And I just want to share today's headline with you to say, just look at where we are on this controversy about masks, whether we should or should not wear masks. 1 year into the pandemic, today's Indian Express, we have a headline which says, it says, mask up, follow COVID norms, or be ready for restrictions. 1 year into the pandemic, we are still having our administrations, our governments are still having to tell us that we ought to mask up. So, you know, what happened to this messaging? So on the mask front, there were heads of governments again who were making fun of the media. So you had a Trump, you had a Bolsonaro from Brazil, the president of Brazil, making the Tanzanian president who unfortunately passed away this week. He was just 61. These were all cynics and they were all skeptics of the pandemic. And they were actually in press conferences making fun of the media people who were wearing masks. So what does it do to us? We are, as I said, a bridge. We have gone to heads of government, we've gone to policymakers. Policymakers are telling us one thing, they are saying, the doctors and experts are saying, you have to mask up. And we are trying to convey this to the public. On the other hand, when we go to meet the head of the state, they are saying that, look at you guys, you're so scared. Why are you wearing a mask? Oh, come on. I mean, I'm not able to play these clips out to you, but you just have to, they're available at the click of a button, you know, where you can just see what are the things that were said to the media and the daily insults that the media had to go through simply because they were doing their stories. Now, this is something which is not confined only to the United States and Brazil. It happened here as well. As the pandemic broke and we went into a lockdown in India on the 23rd or 24th of March, and the movement of the biggest migration in a sense since partition started in India, where the workers, and we don't want to call them migrant workers, there are people who come here to do to build our cities. They moved, they had to go back to their villages and there were no trains, there were no buses, aircraft is not something that they can afford anyway. So they walked up to 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers. Little children, mothers with children on their back, little girls cycling with their fathers at the back so that they could reach them home. I mean, the stories of what children did in that pandemic, how they supported their families and the kind of suffering that they went through. The adults, of course, their parents, but I'm even, because you all are children, telling you that it was just amazing, that world. And when journalists went behind them and they were trying to document it, there was a lot of backlash. And in fact, this backlash of coverage of how the people are suffering, how they have not got jobs, how poverty has increased, all of it, every time journalists have gone to the field and tried to cover it, they have actually had first information reports, that's an FIR filed against them in a local police station by the local administration, saying that, the journalists, it's a fake news that the journalist has put out. So this whole, two-word creation that has been thrown at us, saying that, media creates fake news. I'm not saying that there aren't segments that do not, and we'll come to that. But largely, the journalists do try to go out there and get the real story. They try to be the sponge. They try to be the mirror of the society. What they see is what they try to reproduce, especially those who do not do desk journalism, who go to the field and try to bring the stories of the real people. So when they tried to do that, they had police cases against them. In India, we've had, just to quote our figures, about 57 to 58 cases filed against journalists for merely doing their job. And it has been investigated. It's not as if they were doing fake news. There was no, I mean, they had actually gone there. They had said that promises that were made of giving food grain, of giving sort of compensation, etc., had not reached the people. These are really, really poor people, and they're back in their villages, and they are actually, you know, suffering from hunger, starvation, all that. Anything to do which shows the government in a bad light, which is the job of a journalist, whichever government may be in power. It is our job to show whether the system is working or not, particularly not for us people who are living in good homes, with jobs, with comfort, but those who are out there who have nothing, those who walked 1,500 kilometers to reach their homes because there was no transportation. And at the end of it, when they reached the village, they had prejudice. When all this was reported, you know, there was a backlash. And this backlash has been there in many countries. In China, you've had, I believe there are some students who have joined from China. I just want to say that in China, right from the beginning, there was an attempt to sort of play the pandemic down, which is what again earned a lot of ire from the rest of the world, saying that if they had only shared the information earlier. And then of course, what happened is, you know, there was prejudice which tried to say that, oh, this is a China virus. And, you know, the point is not to let prejudice, but to let information come out, to let journalists, you know, be the sponge where they can pick up that information and put it back to society, put it back to policymakers, so that policies can then be made based on that. And that chain was interrupted. In China, for example, even recently, I think even last month, I think the BBC had to shut down its operations. You know, because they said that they're reporting something which is not right, and which doesn't show the government, which doesn't show the reality. So again, so I see a question saying, there are a lot of questions coming in, I can see, but I will finish saying that, saying what I have to, just sharing what I have to first, and then I'll look at the questions. What I really want is a conversation with you all rather than a monologue from me. But I just, so from this, you know, how countries dealt with how journalists were trying to put out the news. At the same time, there were journalists, there were channels, and let me name the most notorious of them, that's Fox News in America, putting out the news, putting out stuff that Trump was putting out. And, you know, what does it do to the people? They're watching two types of information coming out. Two types of, you know, you can do a contrast, you can do a study in what CNN did and what Fox News did. And on a daily basis, if you have these two channels saying completely two different things, then what is it? How are people to react? What is the general aam janta, as we say in India, you know, the larger citizenry? How are they to then understand how to deal with the pandemic? What is the right thing to do? How ought they to mask up or not? Ought they to obey the rules of lockdowns? Should they keep social distancing? Should it actually be 1 meter, 2 meters, 1 feet? Or are we to be in hugging distance of each other and it doesn't matter? All of this. In fact, the reason we are seeing a second wave, in a sense, in Europe, and now I think it's coming here as well, because we are seeing rising number of cases. Yesterday in India, we've had a huge number again, and it's a real worry as cities are going into lockdown again, simply because we're probably going to go in for a second wave, because nobody has obeyed these, not nobody, but a large number of our citizenry have just, you know, just saying that the pandemic is over and they don't need to obey these rules anymore of mass social distancing, etc. And I'm not even getting into what's happening with, you know, political rallies where, you know, lakhs of people are gathering, where they're not wearing masks, there's no social distancing. And how is that even being allowed in a country where so much of, you know, where there is a second spurt again? So pandemic illiteracy. So what does the media do? Media is supposed to get rid of illiteracy. That's the whole purpose of the media. That's what we were schooled in, that we are supposed to be information givers, not opinion. No, opinion building is a different thing. But first and foremost, our job is to bring the right, correct information to the public. When a public opens the paper, they ought to be able to see that this is the information and this is what is happening on the ground. No cooked up figures, no sort of damning of experts who have done their job and who are saying that this is what we ought to do. And we saw that. You had experts in the last 2 days, and you know that scientists and doctors, they were damned by these skeptic politicians and leaders who said, oh, no, so-and-so has a vested interest. And so prejudice just kept building. There were other kinds of prejudice. So there was the China virus, trying to damn China for the virus, wherever it came from, just sort of damning it like that, saying, calling it a... In India, we saw a sort of attempt to, in the early days of the pandemic, trying to put the spurt of the pandemic, of the cases, on one particular Muslim sect, which was having some meeting in Delhi, in Nizamuddin. So the Tablighi Jamaat, there was all this attempt to make a big, so instead of concentrating on the pandemic that has hit our shores and the migrants that are walking back, there were channels in India who were from morning to evening just talking and, you know, firing this whole Tablighi Jamaat story, saying that this is where it's all coming from. All of it was later, you know, proved to be. And, you know, it was just, this you saw is an example of what prejudice could do. So blocking real information under the garb that it is fake news, which happened with leaders. And at this point, I just want to say something good, because I mean, I'm just saying negative things. And I don't want you children to think that nothing positive happened. And it gives me great pleasure to say that, you know, in lots of assessment that was carried out, it was found that women leaders in different countries did a fabulous job. So you had Angela Merkel in Germany, you had the New Zealand Prime Minister, and many others, Iceland PM. So there were 5 or 6 women prime ministers, who leaders and heads of states, whose record in their countries in the early days was very, very good. And they gave out the right messaging, and they, you know, they did not attack their media for telling the stories that needed to be told. And it was amazing. And I think, you know, we should really give them a big hand, saying that, you know, well, women will bring the change, and women leaders showed us the way in the pandemic. Coming back to journalists. So journalists went, there were many who went to the field everywhere in the world to do the stories. And just to pause and just take a moment to say that several of them actually got COVID and actually died across the world. I'm not quoting you the numbers. I don't have the exact numbers in the world right now, and it's a changing number, but, you know, I can see, you know, it's definitely over 100 journalists that have died worldwide, just like health workers died, and their numbers were much more. So journalists were going there to do their job, to do this information sharing, and they were not able to. I want to say one thing about, you know, the other aspects. So there was this medicine, there was this whole, again, disinformation, information about what medicines people are there for people to take. So there was this whole controversy. There's not much time to get into it, but I'll just touch on it. So there was this whole controversy about the hydrochloroquine, whether it's a good thing. We sent batches of it, and the former president in the US started taking it himself. And, you know, so there was all the scientists saying it's not the best thing. It's not a proven medicine. Then there was this whole thing about whether remdesivir works, and anyway, that's still being used as a medicine. Then there were godmen who were coming out with medication which they claimed was the right cure, which could cure COVID. So there was a lot of disinformation, regarding medication. The point is, till today, we know there is no medication as such for COVID. And the only thing we right now have is the vaccine. That brings us to the chapter of the vaccine. Once again, the vaccine, when it came, so there was a lot of skepticism. How did these experts, how did these companies, the scientists, how did they come out with this vaccine so quickly? So for me, it is, and being married to a scientist and a doctor, it is a question of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Sorry for my language, but I just want to express that, even when they do something, like, I don't think we can believe this. How did they do it so soon? And if they don't, then you say, what are this scientific community doing? They get billions of dollars in research and they can't even come out with a vaccine. So, really, we should stop and think about what we do to our scientists and our experts when we put out information like this, when we talk like this, when we view them like this. Vaccine is here and we all really ought to take it. And yet there is such a vaccine hesitancy. And now there is a new controversy about the AstraZeneca, that, it is causing blood clotting, while actually it's been proven that the numbers are so minuscule. And you have Europe actually halting the vaccine. And everyone is saying that once you halt a vaccine program, it does immense damage because it sets you back. What we need now with the second wave coming everywhere is not halting of the vaccine, but we need it pushed out to all age groups, in fact, And this now brings me to the question of children. I think that one thing that we in the media, have not really explored, and I've been thinking about it the last 2 days when Shukla asked me to make this address to you, that what have we done for children? I mean, other than the fact that we have every now and then said, oh, kids are having such a bad time, there's no school, when can they get back? Is it safe for them to get back? And what about the peer isolation? Everything that you people have suffered, you've really, really taken it, you've been one of the worst hit, I think, children. But in terms of the medication, in terms of the children are really hit by COVID, in what sense are they hit? What can be done? Should they get vaccinated? I think in the media, we have not really, this is an area that we've not really given the kind of concentrated coverage which we ought to. Maybe it was just busy doing other things, but then, children are, this is something maybe we should shore up in the future, because if the vaccination program is to be, spread out to children, then we need to know what age group is correct, etc. Or we need more writing on this. I feel as a journalist that we journalists, those who are actively working on this, on the COVID pandemic, it's been one of the biggest stories. We really ought to. We've not done a great service to you all by not looking. I was looking at some figures, and the American Academy of Pediatrics says that 3.28 million children were tested, and that tested positive in America. So, as you know, there are 12 crore active cases in the world, of which 27 lakh people are dead. That is 2.7 million are lost their lives to COVID. So, I think, this is one area that we really have done disservice to you all, and we really ought to shore up our coverage. Loads of stories on lockdowns, travel bans, different kinds. Should there be a lockdown? Shouldn't there? So there's always this lobby which says, how can we have a lockdown when there is, it's affecting the economy? And the other side saying that, well, listen, life comes first. And if we don't live, what's the point? What are we talking about? Jobs. So as you know, UK has had a very hard lockdown, and they've in the last, I think 60 days or 30 days, and they have really managed to bring down the numbers. So these are tough choices. And in this conflicted, I come back to this thing where the situation is challenging, it is dynamic, it is organic, changing every day. The virus itself is mutating, and that itself is a fear. how is the media to sort of sail on the high seas with this story? How has it sailed? How has it done? If I were to give you a kind of an assessment of 1 on 10 as an observer now, I mean, I'm no longer active in journalism. I'm not writing stories every day or doing television anymore. But of course, as a journalist, you know, journalism runs in my blood, and I'm reading 5 papers a day, and I'm always discussing things and looking at it and studying the media. I would say that by and large, the media has done a really good job. I would give them 7 on 10, despite all the problems they've had. I mean, you just have to see some of those press conferences in the White House when Trump was the president, and the way he was calling out the media who were asking questions on the pandemic, the way they were pushing back. It is something of things to be kept in a museum record of how the media should be courageous, speaking back to power, truth to power, standing, you know, even when the head of a nation is sort of, you know, coming down on you heavily, abusing you, calling you enemy of the people. Media has got called enemy of the people when the media is trying to do its job. At this point, I don't know what the time is. It's 9:30. Would this be a good time? I don't know who the moderator is. Would this be a good time where we can maybe entertain some of the questions? Because then, you know, the rest of it also can come through that, if that's okay. Because I see a lot of questions coming in.
Yes, yes, ma'am. We'd like you to take some of these questions. I'll just read out the questions to you and you can proceed to answer them. Is that okay?
Sure, that's perfect.
All right. The first question to you is, how do media persons and journalists cope with the backlash and accusations of fake news when you're just trying to do your job? So how do you cope with it?
So the last utterance, I mean, what I just said about how the journalists in the White House press room, when Trump used to call them enemy of the people, and say that your question is fake, you are a fake. The way they responded, I think that must go down in media history as a benchmark of how we should stand our ground and talk and say, do what we have to do. And on the ground, we just have to do what we have to do. We love our profession. We are devoted to it. We are truth tellers. We ought to be truth tellers. Those who are not truth telling, those who are indulging in fake news, as we have been through some of the channels. I've not named the Indian ones. I don't want a defamation case against me and, you know, and go to jail and sit in some, you know what I mean? But you know what I mean. Everyone knows who these channels are, and papers even, you know, who manufacture fake news. So, and we have to call them out as well. So we not only have to call out the government, which is not doing its job in different parts of the globe, we also have to call out our media colleagues who are creating a fake industry and giving the versions of these fake leaders. So we have to stand our ground. If we are committed to the truth, we've got to do our truth telling.
All right. Thank you for that. The next question is from Boris, and he's asking, why does fake news spread faster than real news?
That's a very interesting question. First of all, I just want to say that these two words, fake news, just excuse me 1 minute. The two words, we have to be very wary of it as to where it is coming from. When it is coming from a leader who wants to damn a good journalist, you know, the citizenry should see it as it is, that they are saying we are giving fake news simply because they don't want the real news given out. So it's very easy to say fake news and condemn, right? So there's that sort of fake news. Then there is actual real fake news where which, as you know, is rampant on what is called the WhatsApp University, on the digital media platforms. So you have robots, you have bots, right? Which, you come out with one view, and it's all ideologically. Unfortunately, Boris, in a world we've got ideologically divided. You are either on this side of the conversation, or you're on the other side of the ideology. And we've seen it play out. We've seen it play out in America like, never before. We are seeing it play out in India. These are two countries, the largest democracies in the world, and we are seeing this playing out in these two countries. And, you have to just see the Black Lives Matter, what happened, what were the two dialogues about it. So it spreads because there's an industry out there that is sort of motivated, is sort of to spread fake news. So I guess that's a long answer to your short question.
This is from Joshua Chen, and he's asking, why is the government ignorant to the truth? Why can't they cooperate with the journalists and stop the pandemic?
If I say something that I really feel, I will be charged with sedition. Well, as a journalist for 40 years, first in print, then in television for many years, and then, having written for digital media as well, where I've actually watched the media in a platform called The Hoot, that how our own colleagues are behaving, how they are telling stories. And also having watched politics play out very closely over 40 years, it's a long time. We do not, unfortunately, have governments which are totally bona fide. Well, I'm inviting sedition now, but the point is that, yeah, where is the concern for the real people? Where is the concern for example, in India, for the 600 million people who are, who don't know where their next meal is coming from? Where is that concern? So do we have governments who really care for the poor? We're not talking about the rich. Or are we just catering to those who already have and making sure that their nests get further comfortable? Or are we taking care? So I just feel they don't want the truth to come out. For example, the migration story in India, which I quoted earlier. Why is it that they were getting FIRs against them, the journalists, when they were doing stories? Why were they being stopped? Why were there hurdles in their path to put out those stories? The government should have said, this is awful what is happening. Why is it that we were, the journalists were stopped? Or, journalists did their job. But yeah, because they don't want the truth to be out. They don't want their incompetencies to come out in the public. Unfortunately, the public and the citizenry are also divided ideologically. So it's a really, really tough pot that we are cooking.
Well, thanks for that answer. I think you have to be so careful not to tread that legal line of getting a case.
Don't worry, I'm not afraid.
The next question to you is from Sandhya, and she is asking, how does the media maintain the balance between bad news and good news, and how they spread? They have to let people know about the real situation, but not cause havoc in the people. So how do they do this?
Not cause havoc. Sandhya, I just want to know what you mean by this, because cause havoc in what sense? Like if I go to the field and I say that, a 10-year-old child hasn't eaten for the last 7 days because the parents have no rations, and her siblings, 4 of the others, have also not had any food. The story can be hard for a reader, but I don't know what you mean by cause havoc, because if we are to be challenged morally about people who we are not taking care of, then we have to be challenged. in a sense, I also understand what you mean by havoc. It could also mean that, for example, the Tablighi Jamaat story, that caused havoc. I mean, you were going after one particular community who had come for some event of theirs, allowed by the government to hold that event. It was a religious whatever congregation, and you suddenly see that they have spread it, and that's causing havoc. What is it doing? It's sort of maligning a certain community. That for me is what is causing havoc. And you're absolutely right that we have to uh, we have to call out, as I said, we have to call out those who are causing the havoc. They really ought to be called out. And, there are channels in India which are being called out in the United Kingdom. And they say that we will not allow this channel to be shown here because it is not it is not obeying the code of conduct that we have already in place, which we ourselves are supposed to, in television, abide by. And if you're not abiding by it, then we have to be called out and taken off air. That is happening. It ought to happen more.
Right. I think what Sandhya meant by havoc is she's used rattle people. I think she's referring to when certain news causes fear in the public. So how do you balance that out with providing them information, but also not causing fear in the people?
I mean, if there was one thing that caused fear, it was the pandemic, right? So you were in a story that was hugely fearful. It was taking lives every day. As I said, we've lost 27 lakh people, 2.7 million people have died. It's an extremely, and it continues to be till today, a very, very frightening state of affairs. Frightening because people are not obeying the norms, the stipulations that are being put out to them by the experts. They're not listening to them. They're not listening to the media, which is putting on. How do you explain this 1 year later? How do you explain this headline? Mask up? Should we be saying this after 1 year? I mean, come on, you haven't got it. So, the thing is that it is a fearful story. A pandemic is a very, very fearful event. But again, the virus is not an enemy, as somebody in the earlier previous session in the morning said. The virus is not an enemy. You don't see it in that, those kind of dramatic terms. It is a virus, and it's bound to mutate. It's bound to come in. You take your precaution, wear your mask, keep distant, keep socially distant, wash your hands. 3 things we can do till we get our vaccination. And even post-vaccination, we have to maintain these. I feel now that I think I'm never going to take my mask off for the rest of my life. I mean, now because I'm in the comfort of my room, but you should see me otherwise. I'm in a mask and a visor, simply because I don't want to go to hospital and lie there with that, so I'd rather obey that, and I have got 1 jab already. I'm waiting for my next one as somebody who's above 60. So the point is that it is a fearful situation, and it's not a question of making people panic, putting out informations and they're in a way where it makes sense without making people panic. That is, and that is also, we have to bring down our decibel. In the evenings, if you put on television, I have been in television in the early days, we never shouted. We spoke like I'm speaking to you now. And we conveyed everything. Policymakers were listening to us. Things were happening. We didn't have to shout and scream and talk to our guests as if they were some morons, as if our viewers were morons, where we shout and scream. Bring the decibel down. If you do that, if you cause that kind of fear by shouting, screaming, obviously, and people, what they'll do is they'll clam up. They'll say, oh gosh, this is like really, really bad, and I'm not able to, deal with this. Forget about it. Might as well throw my mask off and enjoy life. So yeah, I get your question, and it's a very valid question.
Well, thank you for that. The next question is, how is the media fighting back against overly sensationalized stories spread on less professional WhatsApp family groups?
So there's this whole contestation, no, about who is a journalist. So you have everybody now thinks that they're journalists because they've got a mobile phone in their hand, they're taking pictures, they're sending things, they're sending fake pictures. They're taking a picture from Pakistan and passing it off as India, from India and passing it off as something in Bangladesh, you know. So this kind of, there's an industry out there. The point is, journalists, you become a journalist after going through not necessarily journalism school, but a process. There's a training period where you're told what are the do's and don'ts, what is the code of conduct, unwritten, unspoken, but spoken by your editor, told to you every day. You're schooled in that. Those rules are not being followed by this citizen, these people who are just got their cameras in their hand and spreading things on WhatsApp. So they're not journalists. And how do we counter them? It's a big challenge, because there is a study which shows that a lot of mainstream media people, whether they are television or even newspapers, are getting their news firsthand. About, I think 64% or something, I could be contested on the percentage, but it's rather high and frightening, from Twitter. So they see something on Twitter and then they say that, well, here's the news. Come on now, let's build on it. Let's work on it and all. We are supposed to be the ones that showed the news, that told the news to the world. We are supposed to be on the field. But what has happened in newspapers, in television channels is less and less people are going to the field. And so if you do not go to the field and do the stories, a lot of independent journalists are actually doing that because they're passionate about it and they're going. The long form journalism magazines are doing that. But mainstream, the really sort of legacy media, I remember in television, I mean, I was in a car, in a train, in a helicopter, in a flight. I mean, my suitcase used to be at the door, ready to take off wherever the next thing happened. We had to go to the field to bring the real stories of the people. No sitting at your desk and one bite here and another one there and putting it together. And then for 4 hours, just sitting in the studio with 4 guests, the same faces from Delhi, and talking to them every day and making them fight. 2 on this side, 2 on that side. At the end of it, nobody is wiser for what they have got. So if this is the model of doing journalism, it's a model that's not working. And in this model, if legacy media follows this model, then these others who are doing it on WhatsApp and digital media, if the kind of fake news that is spreading, it's much more appealing. So it's a challenge for us. Editors have to sit down and look at this challenge and see that in the next 5 years. But now we have more and more regulations coming in on digital media. We have regulations on our press. So it's going to be a more challenging time.
Right. Thank you. I just have one last question for you, and I'm going to divide this question into 2 parts, but I'd love to hear your opinion on.
Okay.
So as a journalist, what's your opinion on social media influencers? Because as you said, people can go on Twitter and post whatever their opinion is, and that becomes news. But this does not have any filter to it. They're not trained to get information out. They do not have a code of conduct on how they post this information out to the public. And more often than not, these are just...
I can't hear you. You've gone mute. On mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So certain individuals on social media who call themselves influencers have a huger fan following than media or newspapers can ever reach. So what's your opinion on that?
As I said, I've revealed my age, and in the pandemic, I've also revealed the color of my hair. I just want to say this is a new world, I mean, I just don't get all this about influencers. First of all, even as a journalist, I never felt that, I never agreed with this definition that television journalists are celebrities. I never ever gave an autograph because I said, what? I mean, this is not, we are journalists. Don't do this celebrity thing because then you will push us away. we will become unreal people. And in a sense, that is what has happened, where people think that they're some whatever celebrity, and then everything then that follows from them is is a touch unreal. And we need to be real. We're real people. We're going to meet real people, coming back and telling the politician, this is what we are, the real people have told us. If we get all fancy and stop going to the ground, then it's not going to work. So first of all, on that is my view. Now the new thing of the social media influencers who have more eyeballs than, I don't know, I'm a strange sort of journalist, strange sort of creature, and I know others who are like me as well, old school. I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on Facebook, and I'll say one thing, that I haven't done badly for that. I've made documentary films after I've quit television, and every single film, my last film, Velvet Revolution, I've shown in some 250 places physically in so many countries, and talk to live audiences, all this without Facebook, without Twitter. It's a waste of time. I am on WhatsApp. It's about, because, I feel it's a little more personal. And of course, I'm worried about the WhatsApp University, but, I don't get it about this social media influencer. I get amazed when TikTok closed and there was all these stories about how these people had all these accounts and how they were doing these amazing dances. I watch it with amusement. I think if people are being creative and doing things which are not harming anyone, it's fine. But if they're doing something to spread toxicity, talking communal language, dividing communities, and being misogynistic against women, something that we face all the time, if all that happens, then that's really terrible. And I condemn it outright. I don't give two hoots about such social media influences.
Thank you. Just one very last thing from you. Could you please brief all of the young people watching you, listening to you, about a code that they can follow when they take to social media? Because there are comment boxes everywhere, and all of us are entitled to sharing our own opinion on social media these days. And I think it's so important for youngsters to understand that they need to have a set of guidelines or a sort of code that they need to follow before they can post anything out into the world.
Yeah, so I'll just share what the code that I know as a journalist. I mean, I can just say one thing, that in my so many years career in different media, different forms, print, television, digital, documentary, the one thing that I'm proud of is that I never had to put out a rejoinder and say that, I'm sorry, I made a mistake on that. I'm not saying people shouldn't make mistakes. They can. And if they do, and if they say sorry, it's fine. But I'm glad of my own record. And that is because I was like a fundamentalist when it came to checking and making sure that your source is a gold source. If you're putting out a story which is exclusive, you make sure not just rush to print, rush to television, to put out the story to beat everyone. You beat everyone. I was very, very competitive. And I'm almost always beat everyone. And I don't mean this as a little boast here. I'm just saying it is possible to do that. But at the same time, do not ever give up the basic fundamental principle of check, check, check. Make sure that the news or information that you're putting out is actually valid, because there's so much going on in WhatsApp. In fact, now I will say that sometimes in this WhatsApp university, there have been one or two occasions, I must confess, where I have forwarded something. And the next minute I got to, somebody said, no, this was actually 2 years back, something appeared. This is a 2-year-old thing, and I said, oh, I'm so sorry, take it right back. And I learned my lesson, and I said to myself that, what am I doing? But this is not something that I wrote. I just forwarded something which apparently was 2 years old. So I'm saying be very careful, because it can just, and in the excitement of the moment, just make sure that you check. Don't be in a rush, because then you will fall into a well, and you will become the chain that supplies fake news. And you don't want to do that. One question I always get asked, in different sort of gatherings is that how do we know what is real news and what is fake news? You know, how do we differentiate? How do we know which journalist is telling the truth? I think that is a real dilemma. And I think that is something, you have to know the credibility of people. But then how do you know? Because now the faces keep changing and so many people coming in. It's a tough call. It's a tough call. How do you check on what the truth is a tough call. But yeah, life is tough. And if you're going to be in this information business and you're going to be on social media, don't be that person who sent something out which was fake. That's all I'll say.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for spending some time with us. I'm quite sure that everybody who listened to you today learned so much and they had so much to take away from you. Thank you so much once again for being a part of the Parikrama Science Festival.
I hope so. And I wish I could have heard them as well and seen them. And I just want to say that you kids have been fabulous. And I just hope that you've used this 1 year, and I'm sure you have, doing really, really creative things. And let's all hope that this pandemic comes to an end and you guys can get back to school, because there's no place like school. There's no place like college and university. And you will be back there soon. Thank you.